So what do we do? We've won our independence from England. We are now a nation standing on our own 2 feet. But what do we do? We are a nation, yes, but we are a nation of 13 squabbling states who aren't really happy with one another, and I'm pretty confident in the statement that each one thought they could do a better job running the country than any of the other states possibly could. So what do? They choose a confederation as their first government. Okay, now a confederation is a loose union of states where you have a federal level, a national level, in other words, and a state level. They both exist at the same time. And yet, the states retain their sovereignty to essentially do whatever they wanted. You do have a national government for things like, say, defense. But in this system, the states are going to be the ones with the power. They're going to make the decisions for themselves. What are they going to do about fill in the blank? And they don't have to check with any kind of higher authority. Now, today, if the state of California wants to do fill in the blank, it has to make sure that that doesn't conflict with the Constitution or the federal government, the federal laws. Back then, there was no such thing. Each state was able to essentially chart its own course, do whatever it felt like, and do it however it felt like it. For example, during the war, states had created their own individual currencies and tax barriers. And you can think about it. It would be the equivalent of, let's say, you lived in New Jersey and you wanted to go to New York for some reason. Well, you might have New Jersey money that worked in New Jersey, but you would have to trade it for some kind of New York currency when you got across the state line. It would be the equivalent of each state having its own version of the US dollar and no two actually matching up. So this is the way that the states would retain their own powers. They would also set up tax barriers. You would literally have states charging a duty or a tax on anything coming into their state from another state. This was something that a lot of the states liked because it gave them the control over their own destiny, and they thought that this was the best setup possible. Now, in 1777, we get what are called the Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union. It's not really ratified until the last state, Maryland, does so on March 1st, 1781. Now, this is essentially going to be our first government, and it's not really a good one. John Green, in an upcoming video, is going to talk about the Articles of Confederation and say they were, in a word, bad. They were, in 2 words, not good. And they were far from a perfect system. Were they the worst thing that has ever happened? No. In all honesty, it's somewhere in the middle. It was not as good a setup as we would end up with the Constitution itself, but at the same time, it was the old theory of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. This general system had worked good enough during the Revolution, and we had won the Revolution, so why would we not stick with it and keep moving forward? So the Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union, that's going to be our in charge of these United States. Now, the problem was that some states, New York and Virginia, for example, had huge tracts of land west of the Appalachians. They could sell those off to pay their debts while other states could not. The idea was that wherever the boundaries were for the various colonies, those boundaries that are running east and west, those, in theory, the state would continue all the way across. So the new nation ended at the Mississippi River. So like the state of New York or the state of Virginia, their land would stretch all the way from where they are on the East Coast out to the Mississippi River. And that also meant that they had a lot of land they could sell, but not every state had that option. There were those states that were essentially landlocked and did not have any bonus. As a result, if you could sell off the land you had, you could pay off the debts your state had a lot more easily than the states that couldn't. And as a result, there was some friction. You had various states really upset with one another over the fact that, yes, it is supposed to be this way. No, it isn't supposed to be this way. And it was possible that we could end up coming to blows as a result of this. So we do something that we as the American people are exceedingly good at. We compromised. Okay? All those lands, okay, all of that land on the other side of the Appalachians, all the way to the Mississippi River, would be ceded, would be given to the federal government. The federal government then pledged to dispense them for the common good of the Union. In other words, they're going to make new states out of this land. Now, today we think of this as areas like Ohio and Indiana and places like that. Back then, it was just the wild frontier. So states were willing to give up their claims to that land to the federal government as long as they were going to use that land for the common good. Later on, you would get what's called the Northwest Ordinance would confirm this. Now, the Northwest Ordinance is probably one of the most important things done by the Confederation Congress. It started to set up how the land was going to be divided in this area that had been ceded to the federal government. Plus, two, it also outlawed slavery there. So that's going to become an issue that we're going to be coming back to